we're extremely grateful to have Michi Sensei, we'll call him. I'm fortunate to have known him for close to 20 years now. We first met in Tokyo in 1996. He's been very instrumental in helping us develop our study group in Washington, in Tokyo, our Asian group. So he's always been a part of our intellectual life for more than a decade and a half. He has written, I think, one of the best books on, I call it Clausewitz applied by the Kim family. I would say this, it's really a history of the use of military force for political goals by North Korea. And I really recommend it. I read it for the dissertation, which Michi Sensei did at Johns Hopkins. He has both experience as an academic, he's also spent some time at the Ministry of Defense, so he combines the knowledge of theory with the knowledge of practice. And he's going to talk to us today on, let us know whether we have a new Cold War in Asia. So we speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have about an hour of Q&A. Okay. So thank you again, Michi Sensei. And we have given you some of his publications. Are they on the table? And also, if you didn't get an invitation directly, you can give us your business card, and even more importantly, you can contribute to our programs, which are free, by putting money in our cash donation box.
Where does it go?
Where does it go? Where does it go? It goes here, here, exactly. It's it's a Casablanca. There's gambling going on. So someone will come and give me the bundle. So thank you all for funding me. So thanks again, Michi Sensei, for you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robert. It's not working.
Yeah.
Oh, this is just for recording?
It's for recording. It's nice.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert, for the generous introduction. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. My name is Narushige Michishita. I teach International and Security Affairs at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies for GRIPS. And the main GRIPS, if you compare the distance, it's like, it was like 2,000 kilometers, and this is a kind of difficult, hard to measure, but if you measure the distance between here and here, it's like 2,000 several hundred kilometers. So it's not very different from what the Soviet Union were trying to do during the Cold War. And we used to talk about, seed denial, but now we are talking about anti-access area denial capabilities that the Chinese are trying to come up with. And so this is, sea control, sea denial, and anti-access area denial. Slight, expression differences, but fundamentally, these concepts are very close to each other. During the Cold War, Soviet Union turned the Sea of Okhotsk into a strategic bastion. Now it seems that the Chinese are trying to turn South China Sea into a strategic bastion. And they have already called the area a part of their core interest. Right? And in fact, in this, there is a small island called Hainan Island in the South China Sea, and the Chinese are currently constructing a base for their SSBNs. They do it very close to what the Soviets were doing during the war. And also, if you take a look at the kind of equipment that Chinese are trying to use to, come up with these capabilities, and what the Soviet Union was trying to do, or quite similar, partly because the Chinese are buying more or less everything, major assets from Russia right now, and so they have imported. Well, the SSBN is a Chinese design, but they are buying surface ships like Sovereign class destroyers with a lot of anti-ship missiles. They have imported a Varia, which was a Russian aircraft carrier, and turned it to, now it's called Liaoning. And I don't know the Chinese pronunciation, but Liaoning. And now they became operational several months ago. The aircraft carrier became operational several months ago. And one kind of important difference is that China is supposed to be developing what's called the anti-ship ballistic missiles, which did not exist in the Soviet arsenal during the Cold War. And if this come out successful, that would start posing a dire threat to the U.S. Assets, particularly aircraft carrier battle groups, because if one ballistic missile or several ballistic missiles can hit and sink aircraft carrier with a large number of personnel on board, that would be really, make aircraft carrier battle groups obsolete. So that would be a game changer. But the thing is, I kind of doubt the effectiveness or military effectiveness of anti-ship ballistic missiles. Partly because it would be very difficult, and even if it becomes, to some extent, usable, certainly the United States would take countermeasures and make it difficult for anti-ship ballistic missiles to be used successfully. And also, my guess is, well, if the United States think, this is a cutting edge, U.S. has a cutting-edge technology, military technology. If Chinese ASBMs are realistic or feasible, why does the United States not start building the same ASBMs on their own? Because that would make Chinese ships entirely obsolete. Most of the surface ships are obsolete. So why don't we keep building surface ships, submarines? We can just decide to produce our own anti-ship ballistic missiles and destroy all of the Chinese. And we are better in terms of military technology that we have than the Chinese, at least for the time being. So for these reasons, I kind of doubt the feasibility of the anti-ship ballistic missiles. But anyway, China has another kind of backup system, in my opinion. I might be wrong. We'll keep our eyes on this, but they are developing what's called J-20. It's supposedly stealthy bomber or fighter bomber. I don't know how stealthy the Chinese stealth bombers are, but they're supposedly stealthy, and at least stealthier than previous Chinese aircraft. And because what's missing from the Chinese arsenal is they have more or less bought everything that the Soviet has. But this, Tupolev 22M backfires. The Chinese have not imported any of this from Russia. And supposedly Russians said no. And my guess is maybe China is trying to come up with their own version of backfire, which is J-20. I'm not sure, but this is one possibility. So my gut feeling is that J-20 might be used more or less in the same way as the backfires were used during the Cold War. And U.S. counter-strategy, if you take a look at the U.S. counter-strategy to this, during the Cold War, we are talking about maritime strategy, that as I talked about. Now they are talking about air-sea battle, and they are talking about deep penetration. And certainly there are different dimensions, like it used to be a three-dimensional war, ground, ground, sea, and air. But now we have cyberspace and outer space as an important areas of operations of war. So this is now a five-dimensional warfare or operational concept that we are trying to develop. But anyway, it's basically about anti-access, anti-penetration versus penetration, offensive, strategic, assault type of competition. But I think because this is important because the United States and Japan were cooperating very closely together. We are actually, our military assets were integral. Japanese, particularly in terms of Navy, maritime self-defense force could not be effective unless it was working together with, operating together with the US 7th Fleet. So it was, MSDF, Maritime Self-Defense Force, had become almost an integral part of the US Navy. So we had the capabilities that we used against the Soviet, and we kind of certainly reduced some of the assets after the end of the Cold War, but we still maintain core capabilities such as anti-air-to-east in Japan, core capabilities such as anti-submarine warfare, maritime anti-air capabilities, and things like that. So we can actually use these capabilities in our upcoming competition with China. If we decide to, hopefully we don't have to, but if we have to, we can. There are similarities and there are differences. First, the maybe difference is kind of important strategic objectives that the Soviet Union had and the Chinese seem to have. During the Cold War, what we the scenario was kind of, in a way, simple because we were worried about the global war between the US and the Soviet Union. And we knew that there was a European front, possibly the Middle Eastern front, and again, possibly toward the end of the Cold War, Asian Pacific front. But there will be a three-frontal war. Three fronts, three wars? Oh, okay. Well, fine, all right. Class nuclear, strategic nuclear competition. But now, Chinese strategic objective seems to be more complex and a little bit nebulous. We don't know exactly what the Chinese. I don't think Chinese leaders know exactly what they are trying to do, right? I mean, it changes, and the leadership changed. New people come in, Chan Jimin, group, and Princeton, whatever. I don't know. I'm not a specialist. But I mean, there are several different objectives, and one is certainly Taiwan. They are trying to prevent Taiwan from going independent. They are looking for resources, resources in East China Sea and different areas, and they are talking about the protection of sea lines of communication in order to secure their oil line coming from the Middle East. They are not heavily reliant on the oil coming from the Middle East. And maybe more broadly, they might be trying to kind of expand their strategic sphere of influence. And in order to do so, they have to fend off the US pressure. So these lines. And well, these lines will work both for Taiwan, for the resources, and for a more broader strategic objective of expanding spheres of influence. So I mean, related to the first point, maybe the Soviets had a pretty war-fighting strategy. They are really, I mean, we Western strategists were talking about deterrence strategy. That was our focus. But I mean, when we thought, kind of assumed that the Soviet planners had the same kind of vision. That was about basically their strategy was about deterrence. But it turned out it wasn't really. They were more leaning more toward war fighting concepts than their Western counterpart. So. Soviet Union was more like a Clausewitzian war fighting strategy, but China might be trying to use a more nuanced strategy of Sun Tzu, which is winning without fighting. And if you take a look at the Senkaku, what's happening around the Senkaku, they are not fighting with us, but they are trying to expand making their case and expanding their influence by having larger number of ships, just hanging around the area, around the center islands. So it's a kind of abstract tug of war kind of situation, coercive use of force, combined with that propaganda effort. And third, three strategic choke points. This is a kind of bad news for us because during the Cold War, we had to defend only 3 or actually 2, choke points. But now, we are trying to we are talking about this line of defense. There are a lot of straits in this nuclear island chain. So we are talking about 9, 11, some people say 9, places, routes for the the Chinese vessels to pass. Others are saying 11 or more. So there are more to defend for us. Okay, so that's a bad news.
Bad news is we're coming.
Well, that's a good news. Can be good news for the audience. During the Cold War, Soviet Union were undertaking massive strategic, very sophisticated exercises such as OKEAN 1970, OKEAN 1975. But I mean, what the Chinese are doing right now is to put together several relatively small number of vessels and try to pass these strait and go out to the Western Pacific, come out and come back safely. And they say, well, we did a good job. But this is like elementary school kid going out to the excursion and come back safely. But this is not the soccer game, the professional soccer team playing complicated maneuvers to win. So Chinese, certainly they are maybe kids, but the elementary school kids, but they are improving, and they will be in time be a university students and then to an adult, and maybe become a very sophisticated adult. So we have to keep our eyes. 3-dimensional versus 5-dimensional. I have already covered this, and okay, fine. Okay, and okay. Next one. This is a kind of bad news because the Soviet and Americans and Soviets toward the end of the Cold War, when the Soviets really came to Asia, as I said in the 1970s, they knew how to play the game because they had already experienced major crises in Europe. They were kind of practicing between them how to play the game. They played the game aggressively in Berlin, and great Berlin crisis was created. Cuban Missile Crisis, crisis during the Yom Kippur War. They went through all these and realized, okay, we have to be careful in playing this game. We might put ourselves in a global war situation. So when Americans and the Soviets came to Asia, they knew how to play the game. But Chinese, they are playing this game for the first time since the late 19th century. And EP3 incident, do you remember EP3 incident in 2001, in which there was an aggressive Chinese pilot, everybody knew it. When he comes near, watch out, that was a thing. And, on this day, this particular day, he was again flying very aggressively against US Navy EP-3 reconnaissance aircraft or intelligence gathering aircraft and ended up colliding with it. And as a result, EP-3 made an emergency landing on the Hainan Island, whereas this MiG-20, was it MiG-21?
I don't know, but it went straight into the sea.
Oh yeah, crashed into the sea and the pilot was killed. But that's, I think, was only the first example of many examples that we'll be seeing in this region. Europe, bad news, another bad news was during the Cold War, Europe and Asia were coupled because the Soviet Union was a global power, and so you see that both Asian front and the European front. So when we did a good job of enhancing our defense capabilities in Asia, Europeans liked it because it helped. But now, because there is no theater, and Chinese are not militarily confronted with Europeans, Europeans don't really care about the security in Asia. And some European countries such as Spain, France, they would like to sell arms to China. And we keep saying no, please don't. And I was talking to one of kind of Asian hands from Spanish Foreign Ministry when I was in Spain several years ago, and we were talking about this, and I was telling him not to sell arms to China, and he was saying, well, that's true. China is not really a responsible country, but well, it might change, and if it starts behaving okay, we might want to sell arms. So it's like, okay, don't, please don't. But anyway, that was a kind of perception of European planners, and that's we can complain, but that's not too outrageous given their strategic position. Next one is this is a good news because during the Cold War, as I said, Kuril Islands were used as a barrier. Soviet Union occupied Kuril Islands, including Northern Territory. They never gave up Northern Territories. Why? Because it was a part of a very important strategic defense barrier. But now we are talking about using this Ryukyu Island chain into a kind of barrier. Who owns it? Or who owns them? Japan. So we can use the barrier for our purpose. So this is the good news. And finally, this is the bad news. I have to conclude my talk with the bad news, but the Soviet Union had a very inefficient command economy, whereas China does not. Thank you very much.
The good news is that it was an excellent presentation. So we thank you. And, this of course the reverse of the command economy thing, that the Soviet economy was not vulnerable to sanctions. The Chinese economy is highly vulnerable. I mean, in fact, I think, I'll ask the first question. I mean, if you make the first comment, is that actually, if you look at Sino-Japanese trade, primarily trade in China and the rest of the world, China is much more reliant on Japan than Japan is on China, because most of the inputs that go into goods exported from China, the high-value added inputs that cannot be replaced, are made in Japan. So actually, if Japan and the US said, look, there are certain components that you will not sell, this is an enormous crisis. The Soviets were vaguely vulnerable to oil sanctions, oil equipment sanctions, but otherwise, they didn't sell anything and they produced everything at home. So thank you. I promised Michishita Sensei that we had lots of good questions, which is why he unfortunately had to minimize the time of his allotted to his lecture. So the first question in the back, and then in the front, and then in the middle.
Hi, throughout your speech, you spoke a lot about the United States military, Japan, and different countries. and throughout the speech, you used we. I was trying to figure out, I'm wondering, who are you talking about when you say we?
Well, it depends when.
Well, most of the time when you talked about the United States military.
Basically, it was about the U.S. and Japan.
So, I mean, but you're not an ambassador.
Yeah, right.
Military official. So when you say we, it's like you're dragging the United States military to something that you ain't about to get into. The second thing is that I'm sorry, real quick. The second thing is that when you seem to be very critical about China and saying that they're children in an aspect. I was wondering, could you elaborate on why is it that you feel that China is children?
Okay. When I said we, I used we because it's much shorter than the United States and Japan. So in order to save time for Robert. But well, it's basically about, there are a lot of, we can get into details if you like, but there are a lot of different actors, even within the US and Japan. But for the sake of time, I was like just making Japan and the United States look like rational unitary actors, which they are not. So we can talk about it if you like later on. Second one, China is a kid. Well, I'm not really making fun of China or criticizing China. I mean, some people overestimate or exaggerate the Chinese capabilities. And are they critical? I mean, those who are exaggerate Chinese capability tend to be regarded as those people who are critical of China. I'm not critical in that sense because I'm saying, oh, China is not maybe necessarily a big threat at this point at least. So I'm maybe more apologetic to China in that sense. So, and why kids, I mean, well, in order to make it easy for people to understand, Japanese armed forces were like kids during the 1960s. Well, 50s, it was really raised by the U.S. Navy. Our Navy was really raised and nurtured and raised by and trained and equipped by the U.S. Navy. Our Air Force was really, started from scratch, and the U.S. Air Force was behind the scenes. And we were kids back then. China is kids now.
I have a question. Which situation do you suppose? For example, ordinary war, or nuclear weapon war, ordinary weapon war, or nuclear weapon. And there are please explain in each case. And another question is technology can be
for the Cold War.
Oh no,
Current
situation. And technology can be a breakthrough. And maybe our technological race is very, very serious. So, for example, please explain about satellite military or preventive system. Yeah.
Well, conventional versus nuclear, I think,
Conventional.
Chinese nuclear capabilities are much, much inferior to that of those of the US. So it's not much at this point. So China can, Chinese strategists are talking about minimum deterrent. So in case the United States does attack China for unreasonable reasons, then China might attack, make an isolated attack against major. They can't undertake counter force attacks because their forces are not enough for that. So they would be would use a counter value strategy in order to deter the U.S. in a broadest sense. But would it be effective in wartime situation? Well, I doubt it, because Chinese leaders would not want to commit a suicide. technological and conventional capability. So I think basically conventional competition is the most important thing. But this is a competition, but as I said, China is not really trying to fight a war. The best scenario for them to prevail in this competition, I would call it long-term peacetime competition, in which is strategic, abstract, strategic, tug of war of presence, presence and would be important. So I think peacetime a strategy, whole of the government approach is very important because this is not only a competition of military violence, but the competition of winning hearts and minds of the people in the world, in the international community. For example, Japan we shot ourselves in the foot when Ishihara or the government of Japan, prompted by Ishihara's decision to buy up 3 of the 5 islands, Senkaku Islands, we decided to preemptively, the government of Japan decided to preemptively buy the ownership of 3 islands, which really undermined our position internationally because to the people in the international community, it looked like we escalated. We started, and we did. So we have to we did a bad job. Ishihara, I don't know the real intentions of Mr. Ishihara, but basically what he did totally backfired on us and undermined Japanese national interest, and so I blame him for that. Technological competition, satellites, certainly satellites is becoming more important asset, and I'm not a specialist on this, but as I said, this is going to be a 5-dimensional war, so together with the cyber war, we have to really pay a lot of attention to this. Thanks.
So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much for pointing out the similarities and differences between the current and the Cold War situation. My question will be related to the latter. And even though the East Asian geostrategic environment seems to be largely similar to that during the Cold War, do you think that China has ambitions comparable to the Soviet Union in exerting a global presence that could justify calling the developments in East Asia a second Cold War rather than an instance of regional competition? And in this aspect, it is also interesting to look at what China has to offer. Does China have to offer something that is comparable to the model communist Russia could offer to the world during the Cold War?
Thank you very much. Well, we called the wars in Europe in the First World War. First World War wasn't a world war; it was a European war. We still called it the First World War. So I mean, we can decide to call a Asia-only competition, serious Cold War a Cold War. So I mean, it depends on the definition how we define the word. So I mean, European war can be world war, so Asian war can be a Cold War. But I mean, I certainly don't want to. Let me, give you a caveat, because today what I was talking about was a kind of only a part of that broader strategy that we have vis-a-vis China. I would say our core strategy or approach to China is that of engagement and cooperation. But I'm only saying that in order to prevent some of aggressive and irresponsible forces within China from taking the lead or taking, becoming more important in decision-making process, we try to show our capabilities and willingness to discourage those, irresponsible forces and say, well, if you behave in an irresponsible manner, actually you would lose more than otherwise. Okay? So I think what we are trying to do to kind of discourage China again, I don't use the term China, but discourage violence against China and discourage Chinese bad behavior will be in the Chinese national interest. So I think, I keep saying this to the Chinese friends that this is actually in your interest too. And if you, if you look back and think about Japan in the interwar period, nobody in Asia could check Japan and violence against Japan. So irresponsible forces in this country could lead Japan to a disastrous war and created a tragic situation in Asia. China is lucky because there are forces that balance against them, or the balance against bad people within the country. And yeah, so that's what I complete. Did I ask? What was the first part of your question?
Basically, the first part of my question was that I found your presentation very enlightening. However, I think that the term Second Cold War is misleading because China does not aim to exert such a global influence.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm not actually. I didn't clearly tell my conclusion, but my conclusion is we are far away from the Cold War situation. We are talking about, as I said, maybe it's humiliating to the Chinese, but they are still kids in terms of military capabilities they have. But the thing is, strategies change, strategic objectives change, and actually, if you take a look at the Soviet strategy during the Cold War in the 1970s, up until the 1970s, the most important part of its naval strategy was to disrupt Western sea lines of communication. So that's why when they conducted ocean exercises, they came out, a large number of Soviet forces came out into this region in order to cut off slots. But in the 1970s, 80s, they decided to change this focus to a Bayesian strategy, and their strategic focus moved away from this area to the Sea of Okhotsk. So they changed, even the Soviets changed, Chinese will change. And we have to assume that they will keep changing, and we have to keep adjusting ourselves to their changes.
Let me follow up on
the question. I know that's interesting. Related to this, the Chinese friends, when they criticize for this, kind of patriotic or kind of assertive actions that China is taking, they would say, well, we still remember the era of humiliation, and we are kind of taking back, kind of compensating for this by behaving like a great power and trying to become a great power again. And I say, okay, then don't complain about getting balanced against, because you have to like it, because you are now, the fact that they are getting balanced against means that we respect them as a great power. Great powers, if you are engaged in great power games, you get balance against everybody, you play this game. And so don't keep complaining about it and start liking it.
That probably answered my question, which is if you look at what Beijing has done the past few years, it's done everything to antagonize Japan, the US, with all the cyber issues. Every country in the South China Sea, for practical purposes. It really hasn't reciprocated with Taiwan. There are apparently concerns like in Russia with Japan. So but China, it does very much look now like Germany 1910 or Japan 1930. It seems everything that has been done has resulted in generating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that can be the question.
So there's a limit. I think there are still different people within the Chinese leadership. Some of them are very thoughtful and sophisticated in a sense that they are actually real inherit, bearers of some strategy. But others are like try to show off their strength. And that simple-minded approach is undermining the Chinese nationality. So that's unfortunate. But I mean, it happens, so we have to live with it. I mean, we can't complain about it. I mean, there are straight, crazy people in the US, there are crazy people in Japan. So we have to keep checking against these crazy forces and so that in order to create an environment in which more reasonable, enlightened forces could prevail. And I don't know who are enlightened and who are not.
Hello, sir. Well, thanks a lot for your speech today. And well, I was actually trying to ask the same question that gentleman just asked before. And because, well, I
think we need to adjust the...
I exactly understand like what you're saying by it.
Adjust the volume,
I think I exactly understand like what you're saying about like, China as being a key, because you probably think they were not very capable to take over the region. Well, I'm not,
this time.
Yeah, but I mean, it's probably not very like, how to say, appropriate to just say like a big country like a kid in front of like so many people right here. And well, I mean, you keep saying like like the leaders are like simple-minded and they're like crazy people, but there are probably some like Chinese audience right here who respect your speech a lot. I mean so. And that's like my statement. That's not really a question. And my question is like you said you talked to some like Spanish or people from France. Like they said, well, this country is not responsible enough to maybe take our weapons. So can you explain like what do you mean by not very responsible? And the second question is, I'm sorry. Do you think if China is gonna have the conflict with Japan about the, really had, go to war for Diaoyu Island, or, you guys say Senkaku Island. So how much do you think America gonna, get involved? And yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I mean, again, this is what happens if one country become a great power. Americans always get about nasty wars. They live with it. Why? Because they are great power. And the great powers have to live with all the criticisms and the nasty wars. And that's, China, I think, would have to feel good if they get nasty wars. Because, in the 1980s, when Japan was rising, we were being bashed really heavily. And nasty wars, American Congress people crashing Japanese radio, transistor radio. That was really humiliating. But we lived it with it. Why? Because we are fighting power, and we kind of deserve that kind of treatment or reaction. And we didn't, respond aggressively or too emotionally. We kind of decided, whatever we did. Certainly we didn't like it. And now we realize, back then we are getting bashed. Now we are getting passed. Japan passed it. And now we remember, well, maybe Japan bashing was better than so, I mean, as long as China is bashed, it has to like it. I mean, there might be a time when China also might get passed or might get passed or maybe not very respected. Question of, what was the next question?
The one you said about the, like this Spain or France, they were trying to sell weapons to China, but you mentioned they thought, they're not very responsible to take the weapons.
Oh, okay.
So.
Well, I mean, it's again matter of degree, and we always, when we sell weapons, I mean, Japan has this arms, three bans principles on the ban on arms export, and we are kind of lifting it. So we have to start now, obliged to start thinking about how to strike a good balance between helping our friends in terms of bolstering their defense capabilities. Actually, Japanese government is thinking about providing 10 patrol boats to the Philippines in order for them to fend off Chinese pressure to without a territorial dispute with China. But I mean, when it comes to the sales of F-35s possibly equipped with Japanese technologies, we had a really a big debate, and we are wondering what kind of negative consequences can be created if we decide to sell. You know, the F-35 is not a Japanese aircraft, but if we decide to, contribute to the production of the F-35, and if these F-35s are used for wrong purposes, legitimate, aggressive purposes, that would be really bad. So we are kind of trying to come up with a white list of countries to which we would be willing to sell arms and get away with it. They are kind of, countries which we can trust that to use these weapon systems that we sell in a responsible manner. So I mean, we kind of make that distinction. And the term responsible, this will become a little bit of a, philosophical, but responsible meaning those countries which basically abide by widely upheld international norms and international law or norms and order. Although there are countries, I know that including China, which is emerging countries and which is emerging right now and trying to challenge to some extent the current international order. So that's again, that's also a legitimate thing for emerging countries to do. So I think we have to sit together rather than use force, resort to force, and decide how to adjust or make adjustment to the current international law and norms and practices.
I want to have 2 points. First one, I want to put a bit poor water in the wine of when you said press American capabilities, weapon capabilities. I think the Australian writer, said the Americans overestimate their capabilities to hide in the West, in the Pacific. The Chinese capabilities to detect is much better than the Americans think about it. The other point is about submarines.
How do you know that?
Oh, that's what he wrote. The other point. I think it's.
I know the fact that there was an occasion in which Chinese submarine popped up in the sea near the US. This kind of catch and mouse game is going on. But I don't know exactly I don't know whether the US has detected the Chinese submarine or not. And even if the US, I would expect the US not to reveal their capability to detect by responding to the Chinese submarines operating nearby, because that would reveal.
But I think there was.
I would keep quiet and let it pop up and say, "Wow, and then kill it easily when it comes to war."
I think there is a second case with a submarine and coming near to the aircraft carrier. It was a German submarine. They made a kind of a war game in Europe. And this German submarines came very close to the aircraft carrier. And the Americans was very surprised that they didn't. They couldn't detect it. So in this way, I think the Germans are worried that they don't trust the American capabilities to hide the aircraft carriers.
Certainly, I take your point, and true. But that's the whole reason why we have to operate together in a closely coordinated manner within the US and Japan, because we have tremendous anti-submarine warfare capabilities. And if, as I said, if we were helping the US aircraft carrier, I mean, it might have not happened. And but we are not, you know, this Chinese submarine popped up. We are not in war. It was not a wartime situation. In war, everything will be different.
My second point is, some months before, every world looked to the Singapore Islands. Now the world is looking to the North Korea. How does the nuclear test play to the advantage of China? Because they can do their go to the Singapore Island like before. And nobody talks about it. But the world talks now about North Korea. So this is a kind of a game of an ally to help perhaps the Chinese. It's this way.
We don't know how closely coordinated their policies are, but there has been a kind of a circumstantial evidence that they might. Two things. One is that when the North Koreans showed their new longer range missile system in the military parade last April, KN-08, we identified, we knew that, or we learned later, that mobile launchers used for these missiles came from China. And that was the company under PLA, People's Liberation Army, of pieces sold it then to the North Koreans. So I don't know how intentional or deliberate that decision was. But it might suggest a connection and relatively close coordination between the two militaries. Maybe it was not about the highest Chinese civilian leaderships involved, but it might be about mill-to-mill cooperation. Another thing is that after Yongbyon Island, South Korean offshore island in JLC was shelled by North Korea in November 2010, I read a very interesting report coming out from a Xinhua news agency, Chinese offshore Xinhua news agency, detailing the North Korean legal argument as to the, which sea area belongs to North Korea, which belongs to South Korea, the legal problems that this northern limit line, which is a quasi borderline between the North and South, looked like. And all that, I was really surprised how Chinese, this is not many people know the details of the legal issues in this region. Right? Yeah, the Chinese, apparently North Koreans had briefed the Chinese friends, detailed explanation of the legal issues in the LOC and the Northern China. So I was like, okay, there must be some kind of pretty close coordination taking place between China and North Korea. So I don't know. We have
a lot of questions, and time is limited by the rules of the building. So why don't we bunch them,
okay,
and then you will answer the ones you feel like answering.
Well,
you choose. Okay. If you could just well, let's answer two questions in the back, because of where the two gentlemen in the back, and then one in the back here, and then one here, and then one here. Okay. So quick, like one or two sentences, kind of,
yeah,
your long question, and then you put them together, because some of them may be related.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks for the talk. I just have a quick one. So you said during the Cold War, Japan told its people a cover-up story, that while they were escalating the maritime standoff, that they were doing this because the food and oil resources would be indefensible if the war broke out.
Not really. I mean, she was, in
Let's
war.
put them together. Let's show.
I'm just wondering if we can expect any more cover-up stories this time around.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question.
And my question is that Japan is now, say, 60 years plus since the war. How much does Japanese history hold back Japan from rearming fully and moving on and being like, a critical player militarily, as opposed to being subject to American powers?
Mine is a very broad question, and I'd like to put myself into the Chinese shoes. You mentioned that it's good for China to be balanced against, but with the Asian pivot and 6 aircraft carriers in the Asia Pacific, and even before that, wouldn't you say that really it's China that's balancing against the US?
And then we have one question in the back, couple more here, and then we go to some kind of quick questions. And then the two gentlemen here and then here. That would be.
Mine would probably be something simple that you probably can answer right now. Basically, I was looking on the internet and at the Chinese capability. And from the aircraft carriers to having one of the world's first type of destroyer that they have, along with intercontinental ballistic missiles. I still find it quite, I still feel quite unsure how you could say China, and especially being the second largest military in the world, that you can say that they don't have the capability. Now, me being honest, I wouldn't know. I was only in the Marine Corps for 9 years, 4 months, and 7 days. But I would like to find out, how is it that you continuously say that they don't have the capability when we know through not only the internet, businessinsider.com, that you can find all this information about China, and being in the military, I basically seen a lot of it. So I was just trying to figure out how is it you continuously say, where do you get your information from, so I can find out.
Yes. Two short questions here and then go some. Okay, very short.
Just
give reward for the shortest question.
The CCP is the Russia first time, and since we get here, there's 4 F-35, that's 24 and large submarine, and also conservation of energy corporate. Sorry, I was just talking about that's among the highest technology that Russia has. That's the transfer to China. And it seems to me it's a J-20, for example. It's the multi-role fighter. Is a very similar production quality of the S-475. So I agree with you that Chinese military is very much the remember level. But this kind of the coordination again, I mean, it seems to me that China give up of indigenous in the development with it, then coordinate and try to import a lot of technology from Russia again. So it is, seems to me a lot of that's a bad thing for Japan and for you. You mean the United States and the Japan. Thank you.
Gabor, short.
I have 2 questions. This was one of these. How do you see the China-Russia relations on defense? It looks very friendly on the surface, but under the surface I'm not so sure about. And my other question is that you build your lecture on comparison between the Soviet and the Chinese situation, and you have a certain trust of China's peaceful nature, but considering their recent history, I mean, after the Second World War, China has a lot more violent, fast history. They were not afraid to use nuclear power. They attacked India, Vietnam, fired at Taiwan, got involved, attacked Soviet Union, got involved in the Korean War, and so on. Doesn't that increase really the risk of certain scale of military conflict now compared to the Soviet times in this region?
Yeah, I'm working on Okinawa, so I ask you the U.S. forces deployed more, and well, transformation started many years ago, but still it's not, it's not finished. And, well, but the situation has been changing very quickly these days. And so do you think that forward deployment of military forces, U.S. forces, will change probably, for instance, in the case of Chinese will put anti-ship missiles development and so forth, and other developments, technology developments and so on, will change the whole picture. And so at this time, still it's not yet Cold War type of situation. So my question is about war development of U.S. forces.
Thank you. About story, I don't think it's much less likely that we will have to use the cover story again, because now defense, kind of discourse on defense matters in this country is much more open and frank. And even if you talk about closely cooperating with the U.S. to balance against China, everybody would actually welcome it. During the Cold War, people said no, Cold War, no military commitment. And the second history issue is it limiting Japanese capabilities to some extent? But ultimately, this is, I think we are making our own decision to limit our commitment and responsibilities, because for one, we don't trust ourselves. We don't. We are not sure whether we will be able to handle military issues properly. We made a big mistake which ruined ourselves, and we still learn kind of hard lesson. And we are, and the Japanese people, because we didn't really engage in serious debate about defense issues in the past, I don't know, 60, 70 years, and we are kids in that sense. And I kind of agree, and we have to improve, but I certainly see the risks involved in making a bigger, wider commitment. And also, we are isolationists, and when we talk about pacifism, it's not pacifism, because pacifists don't finance wars. We finance wars. We paid $13 billion to the Gulf War effort, and we are not pacifists. We are isolationists because it's comfortable. We don't have to commit ourselves. We don't have to put our people, our servicemen's lives in harm's way. And this is comfortable. As long as we can keep this, we will try to keep this. Isn't China balancing against us? Not really, because they are the rising power. We are not. And in our case, Japanese case, we might be the declining power. We don't balance against. And there was no need for us to balance against China during the war, but now we have to balance against China because it's rising power. Chinese capabilities, am I kind of underestimating the Chinese capabilities? Well, I mean, it depends on, but I basically not, because I'm comparing here the Chinese capabilities with US capabilities. Certainly, if you compare Chinese capabilities with the Filipino military capabilities, certainly, that's great. But I mean, when I talk to a self-defense force officer, my friends, we talk about Chinese aircraft carrier, and they would tell you that it would be very easy for them to sink Chinese aircraft carrier when it comes to war. But maybe that's not an issue, because as long as China uses these aircraft carriers in a symbolic manner against Filipinos, Vietnamese, and other countries, relatively small countries in Asia, warfighting capabilities simply does not matter. So we have to kind of be complacent in some ways, but should not in other ways. And also the numbers matter, but in this globalized technology, high-tech world of high technology, often in many cases quality overwhelms the number. And I think at this point of time, still quality matters more. And if numbers, only numbers count, then North Korea would be the sixth largest, most powerful military power in the world, which is it's not. Russia, Sino-Russian cooperation. Well, I think when Russia sold the Sukhoi 27s to China, it was regarded as what was called monkey version. It's a kind of downgraded version, and whereas Russians sold high performance versions of Sukhoi 27s to India. So they distinguish between China and Russia, Indians. China and Indians will not pose a threat to Russia, whereas China can. So but they want to make money, so they sell arms. But Chinese capabilities. Okay. Didn't China learn lessons from their wars with India, Vietnam, and other things? Well, they are not fighting great power wars. Great wars or competition between great powers and wars, and competition between big power and the smaller powers are totally different, because and when you are talking about great power competition, you are talking about the possibility of escalation of regional big disastrous war, and you would like to prevent that from happening. And you can't be, if you are talking about big power, small power game, I mean, if you take a look at what the United States has been doing with these small powers, they can be very aggressive and get away with being aggressive and stupid in some cases. Why? Because they are not addressing this. This is not a great power games, power competition. But when it comes to superpower competition, you are talking about the possibility of escalation of the situation into global nuclear war. Finally, U.S. deployment of U.S. forces in Japan. I think it depends on how serious this competition will become. If this will continue to be a kind of abstract peacetime competition where strategic presence is about game of presence, then forward deployment is a great idea, because by forward deploying our forces, we can maintain high level of patrol and surveillance activities, high level of presence, strategic presence. We can maintain our forces in this area in order to fend off kind of abstract coercive Chinese pressure. Whereas when we start talking about war fighting, deploying forces close to the, in the forward positions are a stupid idea. So in that case, we have to relocate. I would relocate U.S., for example, Marines to Tohoku or Guam or to the Philippines, and I would relocate also Kadena Air Base to other places, much farther away places. That's it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry I pushed you in a very aggressive way during your presentation. I'm not much of a follower of Sun Tzu, but as Gabor wisely pointed out, the People's Republic hasn't been a follower of Sun Tzu either. But as you saw, there were lots of questions, so I hope it. And we also would like to thank you for having invited our students to participate in a simulation game. We're extremely grateful for this. They all enjoyed it a lot. So thanks again for your friendship, your contribution to Temple, and I'm sure we'll have you soon again when the Cold War becomes hot or something like that. So thanks again. We have several events next week.